Hey, it's Gareth Price. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Professor Watson, and this is
Duke Skellington.
As You Know. And we are now with one of the best drummers in the Los Angeles swing scene, I would say. We want to start off with a very simple question for you. When did you start playing drums?
Yeah. Hey guys, good to see you. Hello YouTube. How you doing? Glad that Jitterbug could have me here. Skellington, Duke, nice to meet you. Haven't met you yet, but
Nice to meet you too, brother.
yeah. So I started playing drums when I was 10 years old. I basically as a kid I would kind of play drums on like the whole cliche pots and pans kind of thing, and I'd make little kits as a kid, and I started on trumpet originally as a trumpet player, but was always kind of a drummer. And it was actually my mother. She didn't necessarily want me to be a drummer, like because it was really loud and stuff like that. But I started playing when I was 10 years old, and she finally said, "All right, we'll get him a kit," and got me a kit when I was 10 years old for my birthday, and yeah, that was it. It started then, and I was a part of a program. I'm originally from Tucson, Arizona. I was a part of a program there called it was called then the Arizona Jazz Academy, but now it's called the Tucson Jazz Institute, which before me and during my years there, and then even now after, some of the kids coming out of that program are really high level players. And that program in Tucson is basically where I started playing. I didn't necessarily start playing as that whole cliche like rock drummer kind of thing, where kid gets a kit and he starts playing rock. I immediately went to kind of like Count Basie swing stuff, and that was because of Tucson Jazz Institute. So just going through that program, I was brought up strictly with swing and jazz, and I mean, I everything I know is because of that program essentially. But
That sounds amazing, and that's a big
yeah.
plug for them. Anybody watching this right now, or anybody out there who's considering going somewhere, I think that's a high recommendation from one of the best swing drummers in LA. Everybody take heed, take notes. So, and I have a question. So they influenced you down that path during that time, or during any time. Were you ever like curious, like, oh, I'm going to deviate? You mentioned rock. Were you ever like, I'm going to start doing punk rock drums? I'm going to start doing, rock. I'm going to start doing something else. Were you ever interested in that? What was it that made you just stick with swing? Was it completely this program? What is it about swing that makes you choose that over all else? Because you're obviously a talented guy.
Yeah, I never really showed extreme interest in in rock drumming, or I mean, I like to say that I'm a fan of groove, and I love groove, and if it grooves and it swings, essentially is what I say, swings, but if anything can swing, and so there is like obviously Led Zeppelin and like these these massive basically cultures that have been made, essentially their grooves are just as intricate, or if not even more than some grooves that Sonny Payne was making with the Basie band, or that like it all has that the kind of a glow, like an intensity. I think from strictly a rhythm section standpoint. So I never really got into it. However, did learn it. I usually, if you learn jazz drumming, essentially you're going forward, and you learn that, and then you can kind of take steps back and start to take the this idea from swing music, or this idea from swing drumming, and apply it to rock, where it's very much like simplicity and things like that, or even like reggae, but for me it was really more of a culture thing. I I didn't necessarily fit in with the whole rock punk scene. I was kind of like just an old school kid with an old soul, and I was just like, this is great. You know, as a kid, my grandfather, when I'd see him, he lived in Maryland, and I would go back there all the time. And he was a trumpet player, but he showed me, you know, Count Basie originally and Duke Ellington and guys like that. So I guess I grew up more in that sort of 40s big band era, but you know, have progressed to, you know, go earlier and later from that. So, but
that's awesome, man.
Yeah.
So you definitely identified more with the swing kids than you did with the rockers, and
I did.
I can attest to that for sure, man.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I grew up in Tucson, Arizona, so it wasn't like I grew up here in LA where, you know, there's all these different types of people who have all this going on. But in Tucson, there was no scene anyway. You know, there's no swing scene in Tucson other than just learning and education. But you know, I guess I sort of fit in with that style anyway.
Totally. Hey, who would you say are your main influences in the swing scene? You mentioned Basie, but like who else really spoke to you?
Yeah, well, my first drummer, kind of the first drummer I really dug, it was and Buddy Rich. He was kind of my main influence. He, as everyone I think who becomes a big band drummer, you know, they see Buddy playing and they see him, how he moves, and just how, you know, I knew Buddy's playing from Channel One Suite, or, you know, sort of like his later in his life. I knew Buddy's playing, and I grew up with that, and I was like, oh man, well, this is great. And then when I started to get older and started realizing there was more to this, like in high school, that's when I started to look back, and then I saw Buddy playing, you know, when he was my age. You know, he's playing with the Cats, you know, he's playing with the guys, like he's playing with Lester Young, he's playing, you know, all like the guys that were the number one guys in the swing scene, whether that be, you know, in like, you know, the mid to late 30s into the 40s. Like he was there. He was very, you know, he was integrated in that scene as a kid, which is, for me, it was like, okay, I liked Buddy, but now I really like Buddy, you know? And I'm more of a fan of Buddy's early playing, essentially. His earlier playing, I think, speaks more to me, like, you know, when he was playing with Artie Shaw in his band, and obviously those famous recordings, you know, there's a fantastic one, Man of Mars, which is a great recording that
love Man from Mars.
Yeah, and then, you know, just last year, because I subbed for Josh with Jonathan at Camp Hollywood, and we got to play that one, and that was like kind of a dream come true for me, because I remember listening to that, you know, when I was freshman in high school and being like, oh, dude, because that's kind of like the more of a deeper cut kind of thing, you know. But it's yeah, so I really dug kind of listening to Buddy and earlier stuff, and definitely
he's definitely one of the best. He's so incredible, and I'm so glad to hear that you actually enjoy his work too as a drummer. And so I have a two-part question. What was it about Buddy's earlier stuff as a drummer that to you stands out, just from a technical perspective, or stuff? When you listen to Buddy's early work and you say, I like that better, can you tell us a little bit about what it is about his work? I'm curious.
Yeah, you know, I guess when I hear it, I can relate to him strictly from maybe, if you want to get real technical, his skip note. And when I say skip note, I mean the middle note of between the quarter notes that the ride cymbal pattern consists of. So like dun, 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 like his in that dun, 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 that like the skip note. Essentially, to me, when I listen to swing music, that's the first thing I listen to, and I can kind of latch on into that. And whether or not it fits in my groove, the way I like to play, or the way that I prefer things to sound. And so his earlier sound, you know, you hear his skip note, and to me it was like this real sharp kind of not necessarily tight, but it was just like some guys have a closer skip note, and then some guys have a real wide skip note, and they create all these different groups. But for me, he was like sharp and just like to the bones, right in the center, like nailing it, And for me, when I heard that, I was like, oh man, that's what I want to do. Like I want to do that. And then, as you're younger, you get into that mindset, and I was only listening to Buddy. I was only doing this. I was only doing that. And then I was like, oh, but well, there's Joe Jones too. Like, cause that's who, like who is Buddy listening to? So you keep going back and you say, well, Buddy was listening to Big Sid Catlett or Cozy Cole, or, you know what I mean? And like, there's more to it than just Buddy Rich, Gene Krupa, like, which a lot of maybe, the populace kind of can relate. They kind of know who Gene Krupa is, maybe, but there's a lot more to that. And then for me, once I got older, I said, well, who are those guys listening to? You can always trace it back, and I'm still doing it. I'm really probably not as educated as I think to be or I'd like to be, but I'm getting there, and just constantly listening. And so now, that kind of stuck in my head is Buddy's skip note, and then just the way he played and his intensity when he comes at the drums. And then more recently, when I went to 2 years of college in Phoenix, Arizona. And when I did that, I started digging more into Gene Krupa and saying like, okay, what's this guy about? And his skip note is to me wildly different. You're picking hairs here, but for me,
little nuances here and there, right?
Yes, yeah. And when Gene would play, like his snare drum work, his rudiments that he'd be playing on the snare drum, or his rudiments that he would use around the kit, it's a completely different set. Like he had a set of rudiments that he was comfortable with, and then you look at Buddy's playing, and those two things are different. And Buddy used a lot of paradiddle diddles in his snare drum work, or like right, left, but then Gene would be a little bit more straight arrow, so like a little more alternate sticking and things like that. I
would never have thought of that kind of stuff, like as a dancer, that there's so much nuances in the drumming. What do you think, dude?
Well, I'm like, my jaw's on the floor right now, actually, because as a electro swing producer, I mean, I think about this stuff all the time, but I don't have the technical know-how as a professional jazz drummer to really listen to the things you're listening to. I mean, I can listen to it and I know what you're talking about, but I almost feel like I'm in church right now. So just thank you for sharing this with me.
It's rhythm, it's groove. I'm simply just listening to the music, and I'll listen to what I like, I'll listen to this. So when I hear, even in recently now, I love listening to horn players. I forget drummers at this point. I'm all about listening to their phrasing and wanting to, and literally just last night, man, my girlfriend Emma, she put on this recording of Louis Jordan, and he, and like, dude, holy cow. I was like, she put this recording on. She's like, oh, you've probably heard this, but I hadn't heard it. And she put it on, and I freaked out, man. I was like, oh my God, like, dude, that was really great. Like, I want to listen to Louis Jordan more, like, and you hear something that really speaks to you. And to me, from just hearing that one little bit, I was just like, okay, that's awesome. That's exactly what I like to hear. He kind of sounds like his phrasing was a bit like, he has got a little Lester in there. And then essentially you go further and further and you say, oh, Dexter Gordon, but Dexter Gordon listened to Lester. So it's like, it's all this kind of the same
influencers for sure.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's this nice pool of that,
Muddy Waters was heavily influenced by Louis Jordan too. I don't know if you've ever seen the interviews with him, but he cites him heavily. What song? Do you remember the name of the Louis Jordan song?
Oh man, the Mo song, the four Mo's, or something. You know what I mean? Yeah. And he takes like a, either, I can't quite remember. I only heard it once, but he takes like a whole chorus, or he just takes a bridge or something, but he kicks the crap out of it, dude. Like he really swings it hard, and you know, and his rhythm section is just right there with him. So, and there's something to be said about that. I think that a lot of these guys end up finding their sound through playing with the same guys over and over and over again. That was a big, huge part to me of how the sound was developed. You know, for me, it was that was another aspect that I wanted to dig deeper into, you know, seeing like, well, all these influences of playing together. You know, for me, in a college, when I was in college, I was listening to a lot of Oscar Peterson trio. And so you get Ed Thigpen and you get Ray Brown and Oscar, and those three guys, like they had something really beautiful, because like they were playing every night, you know. And if no matter how you feel about the person, if you play with them every night, you're probably going to groove, you know, like
absolutely. The more you hang out with somebody, the tighter that sound gets, for sure. Hey,
right.
Going back to roots of music, I want to talk about some of your roots. What was
Yeah.
the first swing band that you were a part of?
Well, it was the whole swing scene, as in, you know, playing music from the 20s to the 40s. Essentially, I was never really a part of a swing scene until I came here. But I was always into the music, and I did a lot of big band playing through Tucson Jazz Institute. And then I went to college and I went through the whole hip hop thing, but came here, and the first swing band I really played with was, I mean, it's at a theme park, but essentially Five and Dime at Disneyland. Like that was kind of my first view into it. And I met guys like Marcus Howell and Tim Gill. And I met these guys, and then they knew Dave Stuckey, and knew, you know, Carl Sonny and Jonathan Stout. You know, they knew all these guys, and I was like, wow, that's great. And so I started playing with Tim's big band. And then that slowly led to me subbing with Dave Stuckey. And I think Dave is probably the first one. Within about a year and a half, I started playing with Dave here, subbing with him, and kind of sharpened my teeth with Dave. I was kind of cutting him all the way through. You know, I was cutting him through college and things like that, but kind of sharpened him with Dave. And he was the first swing band that I remember playing with, and that was great.
But out here, that you started meeting all these LA swing musicians, and you were starting to talk about that.
Yeah, I basically landed on Dave Stuckey. Dave was the guy who definitely helped me sharpen my teeth when it came to, you know, playing swing music here in LA. He was the first guy that kind of, you know, had me come in and play that type of music. Another big influence for me was Ralph Reynolds. He's a washboard player that, for those who don't know, he's a washboard player at Disneyland. He had this fantastic collection of old drums that I ended up inheriting. And that was kind of the key moment for me. That was like, okay, I need to take this music seriously. I have the gear for it now, so let's just do it. And then started playing with Dave, and having the gear is definitely a big deal for me, because, you know, you can play on calf heads, and you can play, you know, the way the music was intended to play, you know, back then.
Wait, so your first band was Dave Stuckey?
Essentially, yeah. I kind of, you know, I subbed with him, and I brought him on. He's the one I remember. I played at Rusty's or something like that with him the first time. And I was living with another drummer in town. His name was Wes Anderson. I was living with him, and he was starting to play with Dave a little bit too. And then he couldn't make it, so Dave called me, and that was that ended up being it. And so I remember playing with Dave, and I believe it was Wally, Dave, and Dan Barrett. And, you know, these guys were there, and then that's how I met Dan too. And I've become very good friends with Dan. And you know, the essentially just kind of pulling these guys around and wanting them to mentor me, because I'm a firm believer in, if you want to do something, if you see someone who's doing something you want to do, to just go be their friend, you know, like just go hang out with them and just ask them what they do and how you can do it too. It's really essentially pretty simple if you ask me. You know, a lot of people are like, well, how did this happen? How'd you do that? It's like, well, I just started hanging out with them, you know?
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing too, right?
Yeah, totally.
Exactly. Yeah. It's, you know, networking sounds like a lot of times it sounds so like cold and clinical, but really just making friends is, you know, just like becoming friends with people. That's where the real magic happens.
Totally. Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead. I definitely, I mean, just listening with those guys was a key thing. I remember going to Dan Barrett's house, and he would sit there and he'd put records on after record after record and say, check this out, check this, and then would lead to another thing. Oh no, that reminds me this. And by the end of it, he's standing up, like sweating, like, oh, we gotta listen to this. No, we'll put this on. And he's just like, by the end of it, like so stoked, you know, like just to the moon about like this recording. He's like, oh, we gotta check it out. And like, he's like, he wouldn't sit down, you know, he's standing up, like sweating. But like, those are the moments that are really important to me. And I would, as silly as it sounds, I'd come to his house. I'd say, hey, you know, I'm bringing a notebook, and I'd take notes, you know, on like what this sounded like and why I liked it. And then I ask him questions on, you know, the history of it. And he'd give me the history because he's a genius, you know. And that's how I started to get to know that. And, you know, he's introducing me to guys like, you know, Charlie Christian. And I mean, he played with, you know, with Benny Goodman. So, you know, hearing the stories like that those are lost stories that if they're not passed on, you know, they won't live. So.
Yeah, that's cool. It sounds like somebody we need to have on the program too. I mean, this.
Yeah.
Stuff.
Yeah,
so,
totally.
At the end of like a rap CD, they usually like, yo, give your shout outs and all that. I'm just curious, who are some of your favorite musicians to perform with in LA? You brought up some names, you know, just thinking about it, who are some of your favorites?
Yeah, well, my partner in crime is probably Mr. Jason Fabus. Him and I do a lot of everything together. As Marshall knows, we've played with Marshall at Port Vue many times, and we love it there. Him and I definitely, it was more me. I was into the scene, and then I lived with him, and he came out of school from Long Beach, and I was just kind of like, hey, like you should come hang out over here. And then slowly kind of got him integrated, and now he's well known within the scene and being used. So I wouldn't say it's, you know, I'm not taking credit for him being in the scene, but you know, he did his own work. But I definitely I have him basically play in everything I do. And then him as well. He calls me, I call him. He's a good buddy of mine. You know, and then
dynamic duo, huh?
Yeah. And there's a reason for that, because, you know, I like to say the reason why we work so well together is because we're team players. Like, no matter what happens on the stage, no matter what goes wrong, if the chords aren't right or if things like that, or something gets dropped, like him and I, we never stop playing. We play and we figure it out and we move on. Like, we don't hold grudges. We just say, hey man, either, hey, you messed up, or hey, I messed up. Sorry. That was it. And we go, yeah, all right, next, you know, move on. You can't really hold grudges, I think, when it comes to music, because mistakes are going to be made. And sometimes the mistakes being made are the best things that could happen to it. So.
Absolutely. It's good to have a good partner in crime, right, Duke Skellington?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. You know, Jason, and then I, you know, like my the guys, you know, who kind of took me under their wing, was, you know, Ralph Reynolds and Dan Barrett, and really kind of just showed me doing that. Dave Stuckey to an extent, and really who cared about the music. I saw them caring about this music, and I wanted to care for it too, you know, essentially. So seeing them care for it made me kind of have this greater love for it, and seeing that, unfortunately, it is a dying music, and there's nothing we can do about it. But personally, I can do everything about it,
And you are Gareth Price. You are doing so much about it. You are now currently the band leader of, I don't know, 5 bands. I'm not even sure. How do you keep it all together, man? Like, what's the method to the madness for you,
It's funny. I've never thought, I remember thinking when I was playing with these guys, like, well, I'll just probably just stay, maybe I'm not a band leader. And then I came across with Dan on one of the listening nights. He played some Billie Holiday for me, and specifically Billie Holiday when she recorded on the Columbia records from 1933 to 44. I heard that, and I immediately thought of one of my good friends at Disney. Her name is Adrienne De Leon. She played Dime and got hired in with me 5 years ago in Five and Dime. And I always remember hearing her and being like, man, like, she sounds so much like Billie Holiday. And then I heard that music and I was just like, we got to do that. So like, I remember approaching her and saying like, hey, we should do this. And essentially I started this group because I was like, all right, I'll give it a shot. And I started the Nifty Healers, which was that. And then now is morphed into this kind of Billie Holiday thing. So Lady Day and her Nifty Healers is what it's morphed into. And then from there, kind of basically what helped me kind of start with it too is Clifton's. They're the only ones that hired me. So I just kind of was like, all right, great. I'm going to play all the music that I really want to play. So they keep calling. So great. I'm going to put stuff together and play the music that I love. So that was one of them. The Nifty Healers have evolved into what it is now, and hopefully will keep evolving. And I really want to show off Adrienne because she has this beautiful, like, way about singing Billy tunes that it's almost ghost-like, where you're like, holy shit.
She is incredible. I actually got to see you guys play at Clifton's, and she blew me away, man.
Yeah, and she's definitely, to me, even in LA, she's the only one doing this stuff. And that's where I kind of, to zoom in on basically from 1920 to 1940, say, to zoom in on that, you could zoom in a little further to 1930, but then like you can almost zoom way further in and just say only Billie Holiday through from this year to that year. Let's just do that, and I guess I molded that decision based upon how I heard her sing, from working with her for years at Five and Dime, and just said, you know what, like, she's going to soar in this. Like, it's going to sound so good. And so my best friend, Jason, I just say, hey, Jason, here's the recordings, make charts for me. He goes, all right, you got it. Cool. And so he makes the charts for that band, and we move it forward. How
many bands do you currently play in, Gareth? How many bands? Let's lay it out for us.
I play in a lot of different ones here in LA. I lead 4.
Just 4.
Just 4. Yeah. And a lot of people would say that, I've gotten some weird, funny things as like, oh, which band now, or what, like, and I'm hearing the music that I hear and I want to play it. So Nifty Healers, I heard that Billie Holiday stuff. There's another group I have. I called it the Stevedore 6, which essentially was, I love the music that Eddie Condon and Muggsy Spainer was playing during the 40s Dixieland revival. The guys in Chicago, they didn't want to leave Dixieland, so they put a modern rhythm section, a walking bass, chunking guitar, swinging kind of 30s rhythm section into these old, almost New Orleans folkloric tunes, and they're bringing this, for a lack of a better word, this white kind of vibe, and that's just it. Definitely, obviously, in this music, the whole Black culture was extremely important in the early years, and strictly came from their sort of church, obviously. But then you start to get you know, into the 30s, and Muggsy and the guys like that, you know, they're playing the stuff, but they're kind of swinging it, you know, nice and bouncy, and without a tuba player or without a banjo, you know, and chunking along. So Stevedore 6 was that. I said, hey, I want to play that. So we just played that. And then, gosh, and then the Washboard group, Holly Street Stompers, obviously through learning how to play washboard from Ralph Reynolds. That's a completely lost art form as well. Not a lot of people play washboard or play washboard that way. There's a lot of people that do play it and play it differently. Like, you know, Elizabeth plays Elizabeth with Hot Sardines in New York. You know, she plays washboard, but she plays it with brushes. And then you get Dick Hardwick, who is a guy here who worked at Disneyland for years and years. He played washboard with egg beaters. But Ralph Reynolds plays with thimbles, and that's just the way I learned. And he's got this really nice kind of swinging, you know, mid to late 30s sound with that group there, Ellis Island Boys in California Adventure. And I loved that. And then I met Bob Perrins, and Bob's a great friend of mine now too. And we were like, hey, I met him on the street in Pasadena. You know, I'm playing in the street with him busking, and I'm like, oh, hey, we should start a group. Let's play washboard. And he was like, yeah, great. So that was the birth of the Holly Street Stompers, because that's where we were. But so that was that. And then just recently have started kind of dipping back into maybe earlier 20s style with, for instance, with Janet Klein. I play with Janet Klein. And I bring out all my tempo blocks, and I kind of, you know, and the old tack toms and the grab cymbals and the bells and whistles and things like that. But I've loved that too. So I started this thing called the Pacific Boys, which is just this nice, I tend to find that be the most relaxing group I play with, because we just show up and it's tuba, banjo, drums, and a horn player. And I love that. You know, that sound of the 2-beat tuba with, you know, the grab cymbal kind of earlier stuff. But we don't necessarily only play earlier tunes. You know, we're playing tunes from the 30s and 40s, but just doing it in that style. And, you know, I don't think there's necessarily rules, because the guys back then, they weren't following rules. You know, like in the 20s and 30s, this was state of the art. You know, this was like pop music, you know. Just like today, there's guys doing all, you know, EDM and developing that. That's very much similar to what was going on back then, but it was just without technology, essentially. And they were just falling upon these grooves that were like, hey, this sounds great. Like, that's cool, but what should we do? You know?
I love that, man. I love how ambitious, but also you don't pause, like you have these different eras that are inspiring you, and you just feel like compelled, like, you know what, I'm really feeling this particular era, this particular style. I want to put my spin on it. And as a producer myself, like, I find myself kind of going down these rabbit holes of different eras, and just hearing you talk right now, I'm like, wow, man, I could just like pick your brain for hours learning about this stuff, dude. Like, you have a wealth of knowledge, and it's really,
He seems to be a little of an encyclopedia of
yeah.
jazz, too.
It's really fascinating hearing you talk. I'm sorry, were you gonna say something?
No, I mean, I'm nowhere near an encyclopedia versus, you know, these other guys like Dan, and, you know, Dan Barrett's the encyclopedia. Let's be honest. He's the guy who probably knows the most about everything ever. You know, and, you know, guys like that. And then even the guys at Disneyland, you know, Rusty Stiers, their knowledge of this old music is huge. It's immense. And I'm just learning from them. So
that's so great, man. Yeah, you're reminding me that I could go a lot deeper. You know, this rabbit hole goes so deep, and it's so good to understand the history. You know, and so you were talking about the evolution of style, the evolution of sounds. You brought up EDM. I'm curious, what are your thoughts as a classic swing enthusiast, musician? You know, almost a historian or you look at things from a historical perspective. What are your electro swing music? What are your feelings on it?
Yeah, I think, I think music naturally is going to evolve. It always has, and it always will. Um, and I think a key part of that evolution is understanding where you came from, musically. So, like as a baby, you can't just immediately jump out of the womb and start walking and running around. You have to crawl before you can walk. So I think electro swing is definitely, guys like you two. I believe in you guys. And there's DJs that I believe in, and there's DJs that probably shouldn't be DJs. But the majority of the DJs I've met in Los Angeles, they're playing that music, and they at least know the history of the music that was popular from the 20s to 40s or anywhere, even 50s, but like they know of it, they're familiar with it. So if they're familiar with it, then to me that gives them the right to then progress. You know what I mean? But the guys that aren't familiar with it, you know I mean, anyone can do whatever they want, but you can definitely hear the difference from the guys who are familiar with that music and then adapting it to a modern culture, essentially. You can hear that, to me. So like, I hang out at Portview all the time, and I hear what you spin, Marshall, and I hear that you're picking these older tunes, and the one thing that I dig about it is like, well, the history of it. You know where this tune came from, and you've heard the original. You're not just going on YouTube searching 20s jazz, and then By Mir Bis Shane pops up and you say, "Oh, that's great. Let's do that one." Like,
yeah, I probably heard the songs that I spin in my sets numerous times as a dancer ever before I started
exactly.
DJing.
Right. And so I'm all for it, man. Like, I'm all for music developing, because if it doesn't, it's dead. The way it's going now, the fact that we have, electronics are finally, and recording is finally catching up. And what a shame recording wasn't as good as it is today back then. I would have loved to have heard what these bass drums sounded like. The only place you could hear these drums was in the venue themselves. You can't hear what these drums sound like on these, because the wax recordings would get completely messed up if you brought a bass drum in there. That wax needle would just wreak havoc on the wax cylinder. You know what I mean? And they found that out. They said, "Hey, you can't bring anything in here other than a grab cymbal and a wood block, dude. Like, that's it." But these guys, they weren't playing that. You see the pictures, and you see these massive bass drums, and you see the double drumming that was done, where they put a snare drum on the chair and a bass drum, and they wouldn't play a bass drum before the bass drum pedal even existed, and we're talking early teens to late 1800s. Like, that was the whole style of double drumming. I mean, I only know a little bit. Who knows a lot about that is Daniel Glass. He's probably one of the most in-depth, like, drum historians I've ever met. He's
Yeah.
Genius.
Shout out to Daniel Glass. He's awesome.
Yes, he's a genius.
Right? He's teaching drumming in New York.
He is, yeah.
Go kids. Go listen and take some classes from that guy.
If you're into it, and if you dig the old drums, you like that old sound, you got to go check out Daniel Glass. He is a wealth of knowledge. Anyway, but I forget where we were, but
I had a question for you. We were talking about electro swing and your take on it, and you're saying if you know how to appreciate the old stuff and that you're familiar with it, then you're cool with them exploring these new avenues of music. For you, Gareth Price, would you ever be a part of an electro swing band?
Yeah, and that's the thing too, is living in LA, you can't make a living unless you do it all, essentially. So I've done my fair share of rock gigs here, or I had a small thing with like a country band or whatever, And I'm all for, expanding my playing, because that's a part of it is, you have a house where you live, but you don't spend all your time in that house. You got to go out and you got to experience things. So I live in swing. That's where I live. But I do like to adventure, and I'll go out and I'll play this and I'll play that, because I'm not just going to sit in the house all day, So I want to go and hang out over there with those guys, or, do that. So absolutely, I'd love to do that. I just
saw you at Viva killing the 1950s, by the way.
Yeah.
With Cy Cranston. Yeah, you were in there, man.
Right. So, and that's just another avenue where, for me, that was leaving the home. And the way I put it is that style of drumming, I mean, it's a different beast, let's be honest. But the way I put it is that it's the same boat, but different wheelhouse. So maybe playing in a swing 30s swing band, doing like Charlie Christian stuff, Benny Goodman sextet, like Jonathan does, doing stuff like that. You hear the same kind of stuff when it comes to Earl Palmer, or guys like that, or Louis Prima, like Prima Shuffle and things like that. You hear similarities, but you're driving a completely different boat. Instead of a yacht, you're driving a tanker. You know what I mean? So, and especially with guys like Cy Cranston, who, if you've ever listened to, Jackie Wilson, then you obviously can make the connection that Cy is way into that. He's very obviously, he almost sounds exactly like him, but, so when you hear that type of music, you hear that like slamming, 2 and 4, which was essentially, that was rock music, 50s rock and roll, like that. There's definitely there. So I'm very much, I'd like to keep that moving, so I'd like to get, through the 50s and get as comfortable as I can with it as I am with swing music. Comfortable. And then let's move on, then let's just keep going. So maybe by the time I'm like 60, 70 years old, that's when I'll be an electro swing band,
Dude, you're going to master it all, dude. Every era. Love it, man. Love it. You talked a little bit about recording technology, and that's something that I focus on a lot too, because I'll go digging in the crates for something from the 20s and I'll find an incredible drum solo, but I'll end up having to go to the 60s, or even sometimes I find these obscure records from the 70s that are like old ragtime record, like cover bands, but the recording technology was so much greater that I'll actually dig for it. And then other times I'll actually look for the real grimy, grainy stuff. It just depends on like the sonic texture I want to give a song. And so there's a lot of these drum solos that I find and I dig for and I look for. You have ones like, and there's certain styles in electro swing, like the whole drum solo from Sing Sing Sing, Benny Goodman. That's kind of that tom, really tribal sounding. I don't know how to describe it from a drummer's perspective.
Yeah,
it's gotten really big. A lot of tunes, you have intros that are like that. I'm curious, of all these different eras, of all these different bands, all these different types of styles that you mentioned, what's one of your favorite drum solos? Swing drum solos of all time.
Jeez. That's a loaded question. There's a lot.
Really loaded. Sorry, I just threw everything in there. You can comment.
I mean, it's that, obviously that, what truly brought Gene Krupa in that band, in that style, into popular, the truly, like, I'm talking big time, like Justin Bieber popular eyes, was that Sing Sing solo. I mean, when that happened, like, no one did that. That's the thing. No one did solos like that. So he was an innovator, no one was doing anything like that. So he innovated that. And that obviously is legendary, as we all know. I think another one that I've become very familiar with is Cozy Cole. There's his solo on Topsy. He does Topsy Part 2. And I've recently gotten familiar with that by playing with Jennifer Keith and Mondo Durame. Mondo Durame was the saxophone player for Royal Crown Review. And, obviously that, and Daniel Glass was there, through there. He was the drummer with them. But I, playing with them and kind of doing that, he said, hey, here's Topsy, here's this thing. And I came up to it and I was like, right. I don't know about, this was when I was like a true, I was like, look, dude, I just want to swing. I just want to play 30s. All right, I guess I'll play. Sure. And I was a little timid to that music at first. I was like, I don't know. And he said, dude, just check out this drum recording. And I went, oh, okay, sure, fine. And I didn't check it out. And then I came back and I played those gigs and he was like, you haven't listened to the recording, have you? And I was like, no. He's like, dude. And Mondo, he's a good friend of mine. And he was like, look, you have to check this out. You have to listen to this because you can't bring justice to this solo if you don't listen to it. And he said, Paul Lines, the drummer that used to play with them, I think he's gone. He lives in Thailand now or something like that. But he learned that drum solo note for note and played it with them on the gigs. And there's definitely merit to that. I'm a big fan of transcription. I did a lot of transcription of a little bit more modern stuff. I started doing Art Blakey and Philly Joe Jones, transcriptions in college. But that was just to get through the motions of what you need to do to get a degree, which I didn't get anyway. But he said, hey, check out this solo because you need to listen to it and listen to it. So I did, and I did my study and I listened over and over and over. And then it slowly started to dawn on me oh shit, hey, this is swinging. This is cool. It's really not that far away. And it was this beauty. And then that slowly evolved into understanding that style of music, the Prima Shuffle, which was holy crap. Talk about swinging, man. His band swung hard. And so I think Cozy Cole on that recording, it's Topsy Part 2. It's kind of got dum 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 dum. It's got this kind of gosh, I don't know, some almost like hula tiki kind of thing, But
that's Count Basie, right? Count Basie, Topsy.
Well, yeah, essentially. I believe so. I think it is. It's Cozy Cole has Part 1, Part 2. But there's a whole solo he did on it. And I'm sure that's where my age comes into play here. I don't know as much as I should about.
It's okay. We're still young, Kyle. There's a lot more
but
new neo vintage jazz band era that we're in right now with yourself and Josh Colazzo and Jonathan Stout. Curious, who would you say are your favorite neo swing bands other than the ones you're already in, because we know they're incredible, but are there some maybe that we could turn our viewers on to?
Yeah, man. Well, you said it, Josh Colazzo. Shout out to him for sure, because it's him and I that are kind of the guys here in town. And I love Josh, and he's, what an incredible player. Josh is truly, he's actually one of my favorite drummers, believe it or not, because the guy plays Gene Krupa like no one's freaking business, dude.
I almost feel like he's Gene Krupa incarnate sometimes.
Absolutely. And it truly is. And you can tell that's a guy who's done his work, who's studied. He has studied Gene Krupa so much, and lived and breathed his music. And there's look no further for that. So his group, the Candy Jacket stuff that just came out, he just had an album come out.
Yeah, we featured it on the show, actually.
Yeah, it's fantastic, man. And that's, to me, the sound he gets there is he's writing all these tunes or arranging these tunes with Albert and stuff like that. And it is sort of neo swingish, but it's still so ingrained. The roots are there. And when you really listen to it, the way he's playing, and the guys, you know, like Chris playing with him, and Jonathan, and and Nate and Brian Shaw. You know, these guys they've learned from
the best
listening.
in LA. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Pretty much. You know, they've learned from listening, and you know, you hear it in that album. So I would definitely recommend that album. But don't go and listen to it on Spotify. Go find Josh and order it from him and pay the money for it, because he deserves it. He spent a lot of money on that. So if I could encourage anyone to
please go
and
support these artists. We can't make it without you.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm a big fan of that, man. And I think, you know, like, I guess neo swing jazz, essentially saying jazz is this big blanket overstatement now, with a lot of things. But I think neo swing is kind of a good way to describe it. But it's also, I'd like to think, like Dave Stuckey and Jonathan, like that's historic swing. You know, Jonathan Stout is like, he's doing stuff that is like, you know, late 30s to early 40s. Like, you know, it's like zoomed in. So that's historic to me. And that's what I love to do, obviously, like I explained in earlier. But, you know, he's doing essentially that. So I guess I'm just learning from the guys like that.
Awesome, man. Dude, I feel like you have so much respect for all the people that you're playing with too. And that's amazing. You know, it takes a team, right? There's nobody that's going to take it the whole way themselves. So it's really awesome that all these musicians are teaming together and creating some of the best bands that I've heard in the last 20 years, to be honest.
Yeah, that's important. And the community here, I'll say real quick that the community here is a great community. I love being a part of it. I love being accepted into it, and, you know, and being there, because, you know, it doesn't make sense to hold grudges or not like anyone who's in it, because this music's half dead anyway. So you're not doing any justice saying, oh no, this guy kind of sucks. Like, no, don't have him. No, don't do that. The fact that they're even trying to do it is a good thing. You know, it's like, oh, well, you know, and it's obvious, you know, it's like, oh, these guys have probably listened to this music a little bit more than these guys. Or you can tell that there's guys that, you know, sound really good doing one thing and maybe not the other, you know, and they have their thing they do. But by all means, I would never discourage anyone ever to playing this style of music, because it needs it, because it's you know, it's dying. Like, to hold grudges against other drummers or things like that, where it's like, oh, he took my gig, or I don't want, you know, you better not take my gig, or this or that. It's like, no, dude. Like, if Josh wasn't here, I'd probably die from sleep loss, or, you know, like, it's a good thing there's other guys here, you know, like, and the more the merrier, by all means, you know, to bring this music at least back somewhat, you know, but not too far, because if it gets hip again, we don't want that. We don't want it to be super hip, right? Because we want to still keep it
underground.
Let's just, you know, but like, you know, we'll keep it cool, but like, tell people about it, you know. So
keep it underground.
Yeah.
The hardest in Los Angeles. Thank you so much for having this time with us here, Jitterbug Jukebox. Lastly, will you please plug anything that you'd like to plug, and then also, you know, where we can find you online?
Yeah, I don't have a website right now, but I'm definitely on Facebook. If anyone really digs listening to that music, I do have my groups on Facebook. Lady Day and Her Nifty Healers is one. The Holly Street Stompers is another. You know, these groups that I talked about. You know, just to get out. Like, it doesn't matter if I'm playing, or it doesn't matter if anyone's playing, but go to the places that do have live music and do have swing dancing and support them. Go to Joe's, go to the Lindy Loft, you know, go to Porvu, you know, go to Clifton's, these places that have this music, because it doesn't matter if I'm there. It doesn't matter if Big Butter's there. It doesn't matter if Holy Crow's there. You know, there's so many bands here. Jonathan, everyone that have you mentioned. Doesn't matter who's there. You just got to go. And if you go, I'll probably see you because I play in a lot of them.
Right on, man. Hey, thank you so much, dude. You have a swell day. We'll talk
All
to
right.
you soon.
Yeah. Thanks, fellas. Nice to meet you. All right. Take care.